And boy, I'm going to take a stab at this. Brian Knobs, real name Brian Yan Drizovitz. Is that right?
Okay.
Born May 5th,
And
1964. And how about Jerome Saganowicz?
No.
Saganowicz.
No, Saganowicz.
Saganowicz. All right, Gesundheit. He's born July 5th, 1964. Man, I'm sure I'm glad they decided to be Brian Knobs and Jerry Sags. That's a little easier for me.
Well, I would imagine that the Sags came from shortening Saganowicz throughout his childhood. I'm sure that he was just Sags for many years before coming into the wrestling ranks.
Meanwhile, I don't know how. I mean, I've seen a lot of different photos of Brian Knobs, and I've yet to figure out why they call him Knobs. They grew up in Allentown, Pennsylvania. They get their start by training with Vern Gagne and Brad Ringens, and it feels like, boy, look at that early photo of a young Nasty Boy duo here. I mean, is it just me, or did half of wrestling at one point go through Vern's camp and Brad Ringens? I mean, you think about the glory days of the 1980s in professional wrestling, that golden era. Man, it just feels like one big star after another came through that camp.
Well, there weren't a whole lot of camps to go through, and Vern had an established camp in Minnesota with a proven track record. So quite a few top stars had gone through the Vern Gagne camp. It was also notable that if you weren't up to snuff, you didn't continue in the camp for very long. So the Vern camp was a good one, and it was one that people knew about because it wasn't like you could go to your Yellow Pages. You didn't have Google machines back in those days, folks. The Google machine is a new thing. All right. So for old timers like me, we didn't have no Google machine that you could just go look shit up. You had a phone book and you had word of mouth. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the Vern Gagne School of Wrestling was not in the Yellow Pages in any phone book. So it's probably word of mouth, and you probably had to know someone and get someone to even talk to Vern to get Vern to consider letting you come in to try out.
Well, I'll tell you, the Nasty Boys were pushed in the late 80s, the dying days of the AWA. Man, I love these old photos. If you're not already, check us out on YouTube at somethingtowrestle.com, because some of these photos I'd never seen before. But another tag team that we're all familiar with, the Midnight Rockers, they were in the AWA as well. That's a very young Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty.
That's not Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty, but
no, that's still the Nasty Boys. When do you first remember hearing about the Nasty Boys?
Man, I couldn't tell you. I really don't know. It probably was the AWA, but I don't think that they made any kind of a splash that had people going, "Oh my God, the Nasty Boys." So might have seen them during that time, but I don't remember them ever making this big, huge splash that it was like, "Oh my God, the Nasty Boys, got to have them."
Now, normally when we hear about guys who went through, Vern's camp, they become, well, not all the time, but when we've heard of guys like Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair going through, those are technical wrestlers. That's not really going to be the lane for the Nasty Boys. They're going to be brawlers. And I've even seen people comment in social media and make some comments on shoot interviews and certainly newsletters that they might have even been a little too wild at times and bordering recklessness. Was that ever your impression? I mean, what was your first impression of seeing their work? These big, nasty brawlers, the Nasty Boys.
Yeah, I thought they were sloppy. Yeah, I just thought that they were, two big guys that got into the business, and they were sloppy. They were sloppy. They were sloppy in their appearance. They were sloppy in their work, and that, to me, is also what made them different. They weren't smooth. They weren't these guys that went out there and grabbed a hold and did things. They were, as their name implied, they were nasty. So when I say sloppy, I'm not saying it in a bad way. It's just, it was an appearance, and it was a way that they approached their work that they weren't like everybody else. They didn't have the same crisp, smooth collar and elbow, where there's a million Ricky Steamboats that come up and have that smooth. I want to be smooth like that. And I think it's a little more difficult, especially during period of times in the business where it was risky to be sloppy like that and risky to be different. And I'm going to start saying different rather than sloppy because they were just unorthodox in the way that they approached what they did in the ring.
I think that's what I like best about him, Bruce.
That's what everybody liked best about him, but it was hard to put your finger on it.
Yes. They just looked, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but it felt like they had credibility. Like they had that believability. Like these were just guys you would see in a bar and think, okay, they're loud, they're obnoxious, but don't mess with them.
Don't fuck with them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they could back it up.
Do you think that, we've certainly seen guys who would go to great lengths to have that sort of credibility or fear. I mean, if you turn the volume on that up all the way, maybe you get like a Sheik or an Abdullah or a Bruiser Brody, but this sort of brawling style, but not necessarily the bloodlust like some of those names. Was that sort of a happy medium, do you think? If you were going to tone down the violence of an Abdullah or a Sheik or a Bruiser Brody or a big attraction like that, would that be the tag team version of the Nasties, just a little more PG version of that?
A little bit, but I don't know that the market was ready for something like that in a tag team. They had the Road Warriors, and the Road Warriors were probably your upper echelon of guys that looked dangerous and looked like they would hurt you in the ring and things like that. And then there were the Nasty Boys, same thing, but a different approach because they didn't have the muscles. They weren't doing all the same things. So it was, a little different, more dangerous approach to them where they were very unpredictable in what they did in the ring, and their promos, same thing. So it was a different package.
The Nasty Boys are going to try their trade all over the world, really. They're going to hit Memphis, just like everybody did in that era. They're going to stop in Florida, of course. Maybe they had a hookup with Dusty. And they even get a little tour of Japan. But what jumped off the page for me in my research is Brian Knobbs actually got a one-off shot at a house show in Daytona Beach in early June of 1990. He'd be doing the honors for Tugboat there, but not as a tag team, as a singles guy. Later that same summer, they debut with WCW. Do you remember this? I mean, is there any chance you remember meeting Brian or hearing about this at all?
No, certainly don't. That was a shocker to me as well. But obviously, I'm sure it happened, but I don't remember it at all.